In the first episode of Story Theory, I went over what a story was and the 4 pillars of story along with their importance. This episode, I'll go over more detailed fundamentals past the building blocks of story. I'll start with an anti-theme. I don't think this is an official word, but I use it to describe the opposite of the theme. As I said in my antagonist video, there can be multiple possible anti-themes for any given theme. For example, if my theme is teamwork is always effective, my anti-theme could be solo work is always effective, or teamwork is sometimes effective. The more descriptive the theme, the more possible negations. The anti-theme will be necessary for later. Now, character arcs. A character arc is the internal journey of a character. This involves one of their beliefs or values being tested and potentially changed. There are 3 main types of character arcs: positive, negative, and flat. In a positive character arc, the character starts with a belief that goes against the theme, or one of the themes. This belief is challenged, and they eventually switch their belief to one that aligns with the theme. A negative character arc is the reverse. The character starts with a belief that aligns with the theme, has that belief tested, and ends with a belief that goes against the theme. Finally, there's the flat character arc. Here, the character starts with a belief that aligns with the theme. The belief is tested, but the character keeps the belief in the end. Wants versus need is an extra strategy to writing a character arc. A want is something the character desires and thinks will bring them happiness. A need is a lesson the character needs to learn in order to be happy, and this aligns with the theme. So with this approach, the character will begin the story chasing their want, but will eventually learn what they need and abandon their want. This is also a positive arc. John Truby mentioned something similar in his book as part of the 7 key story structure steps. He calls it a weakness and a need. The weakness is the flaw the character has. The need is what they need to do to overcome the flaw. Here, the character also has a desire, but this isn't a negative thing, because the character will eventually reach his objective. He also has the formula, weakness times basic action equals change, where basic action is the character's actions in the plot, and change is the change they get at the end of their arc. So there's want versus need, and there's weakness, need, and desire. Next is characterization. McKee describes this as the sum of all observable qualities of a human being, while Oxford defines it as the creation or construction of a fictional character. It's all the little details that are included in a character to make them as fleshed out and 3-dimensional as possible. Personality, values, style of speech, choice of dress, education, and occupation are all things that McKee considers part of characterization. When a character has good characterization, they can either feel like a real person or a person that could exist in a certain context. Now, the units of measurement. McKee says that there are 4 units of measurement for a plot: beats, scenes, sequences, and acts. The smallest is a beat, which is defined as an exchange or behavior in action/reaction. These changing behaviors shape the turning of a scene. End quote. The more beats in a scene, the faster the pacing, and vice versa. Next is a scene, which he defines as an action through conflict in more or less continuous time and space that turns the value-charged condition of a character's life on at least one value with a degree of perceptible significance. Ideally, every scene is a story event. End quote. Using this definition of story event, what he's saying is that a scene ideally creates meaningful change in the life situation of a character that is expressed and experienced in terms of value and achieved through conflict. End quote. For example, if a scene starts with a character being confident, after action, ideally, it would end with them doubting themselves. Confidence to doubt is the perceptible difference. Next is a sequence, which is defined as a series of scenes, usually 2 to 5, that culminates with greater impact than any previous scene. End quote. Last is an act, which is defined as a series of sequences that peaks in a climactic scene, which causes a major reversal of values, more powerful in its impact than any previous scene or sequence. End quote. There are primarily 3 acts in a movie. I'd take it a step further and add another unit for long-running stories like comics or TV shows. That would be a story arc. I'd define a story arc as a string of acts, usually 3, that has one primary conflict that is resolved in the last act. In TV, a story arc usually happens within a season, while in manga and anime, a story arc can have varying degrees of lengths. As I showed in my Naruto plot structure video, a single story arc can have smaller sub-arcs within it. Next is 3-act structure. Common practice is to split up a story into 3 acts. These 3 acts often have 6 key moments. They are the intro, inciting incident, first act break, midpoint, second act break, and climax. Resolution is also there, but it's not a key moment because it's not as impactful as the others. The introduction is when the story starts and it has the status quo. The inciting incident is the event that sets the plot into motion and gives the protagonist a new quest. The first act break is the beginning of the quest. The midpoint is when something goes wrong and the protagonist changes. The second act break is the second part of the quest. The climax is the 11th hour and the decisive moment that resolves the plot and proves the theme right. The resolution is the aftermath. Act 1 has the intro and inciting incident. Act 2 has the first act break and midpoint. Act 3 has the second act break, climax, and resolution. Next is conflict. Oxford defines this as a serious disagreement or argument. A story isn't a story if there's no problem that needs to be solved. That problem is conflict. There are many types of conflict. Man versus man is when a person has a problem with another person. Man versus self is when a person has an internal struggle. Man versus society is when a person is fighting against a value or concept in society. Man versus nature and man versus technology are when a person is put in conflict with nature or technology. Next is stakes. I define a stake as what there is to lose in conflict. Stakes are directly tied to conflict. When a story has no stakes, it means that the characters have nothing to lose, thus there is no drama. There are three types of stakes: external, emotional/internal, and philosophical. Each of the stakes is tied to one of the pillars. External is the plot. What happens if the characters fail to reach their goal? Emotional is the character. What happens if the character doesn't feel complete and satisfied internally? Philosophical is the theme. What happens if the character fails to prove the theme right? Using my persuasive argument metaphor from episode 1, a story with all three stakes is an argument that brings out the most from its logos, pathos, and ethos. Next is the narrator. The narrator is the person telling the story and is more noticeable in text-based stories. There are two main categories of a narrator: perspective and limit. Perspective is mainly first person or third person. First person means that one of the characters is telling the story. Third person means that there is a story being told to you by an invisible narrator. Limit usually applies to third person. Third person limited means that the narrator can only talk about specific characters and see what they're doing. Third person omniscient means that the narrator knows everything and they can see and talk about all the characters in the story. There are different pros and cons for each perspective and limit, and the decision usually depends on what the author is aiming to do with their story and how much info they want the audience to have. Finally, exposition. Exposition is when the story gives the audience new information that will be necessary for the story to make sense. There isn't much to say about it until I get to the analysis stage of story theory, so that's all I have for now. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, and help me revolutionize the manga industry by buying my manga and spreading the word. All important links will be in the description.